Hey everybody, Billy Obenauer here. Thanks so much for joining me for this lesson. In this lesson, we're going to cover chapter 15 of Bateman and Konopowski's management textbook. This chapter focuses on leading innovation and change within your organization. All right, so let's get started. Now, as we move through this lesson, we're going to summarize how technology fuels innovation. We're going to talk about the criteria on which we base technology decisions in our organization. We're going to compare key ways of acquiring new technologies. We're going to look at the elements of an innovative organization. We're going to discuss what it takes to be a world class organization. Then we're going to describe how we can lead change effectively within our organization. And finally, we're going to touch on the strategies for creating a successful future. Change is something that we can't avoid as leaders. And that's something that became really apparent during the COVID-19 pandemic. If you think about it, colleges that always identified as being in person schools with vibrant campus communities had to begin offering online classes for the first time. They had to offer live sessions through technologies like Zoom and WebEx. Restaurants that were always sit down restaurants began serving takeout and actually using delivery services such as Grubhub to help deliver orders to customers. Now, if you think about this, these technologies, these were not new technologies. The technology behind Grubhub and DoorDash was not new. The technology behind Zoom and WebEx was not new. But our leaders had to adopt these technologies. They had to embrace them in a way that they had never done before because of changes in the environment. Now, as we talk about change and innovation within our organizations, there are three fundamental types of innovation that we're going to discuss here today. The first is called a product innovation. And a product innovation is what we typically think of when we're talking about innovation. This is a change in what we're producing. So, for example, maybe we're producing a new type of phone. All right, the second type of innovation that we're going to talk about here is a process innovation. With a process innovation, we're not changing what we produce, but we're changing how we produce it. So, for example, maybe we have a new manufacturing process that we're using for making our phones. We're producing the same phones that we've always been producing, but we're using a new manufacturing process to be more efficient or more effective in manufacturing. Okay, and then finally, we have a business model innovation. And a business model innovation is a change in how we use our existing technologies and our existing processes to deliver our current products in a more productive and profitable manner. All right. So, for example, maybe we restructure our organization. All right. So maybe we change the hierarchy and we put manufacturing under a new vice president. Maybe we reorganize. Maybe previously we were organized based upon geography and now we organize based upon product line. These are the types of things that we're talking about when we refer to a business model innovation. Technological development is critical to innovation. And there are several forces driving technological development that we need to acknowledge. We're going to take a look at these forces through the lens of colonizing Mars. Okay. Now, first, there needs to be a need or demand for technology. So, if we were looking to develop technologies to colonize Mars, we'd have to have a need or demand to do that. So, an example of a need or demand would be we're destroying the planet and we need to colonize Mars. Okay. Next, meeting this need needs to be theoretically possible, and the knowledge to do so must exist. Okay, so what that means is that we've got a need, but we have to understand how we can meet that need. Okay, so for example, with Mars, Mars is a planet that has atmosphere, okay, much like Earth. Okay, but that atmosphere is not currently viable for humans to live in. Now, I have a friend who works at UTC and he's really into outer space stuff. And I don't understand any of this science, but he tells me that in theory, we could use machinery to alter the atmosphere of Mars so that humans could live there. That means meeting the need would be theoretically possible and that we should have the knowledge to do this. Okay. This must also be practical. Okay, we must be able to convert the relevant scientific knowledge into practice in both engineering and economic terms. Okay, so our knowledge of how to modify the atmosphere of Mars would have to be practical. If it requires machinery that we can't get from Earth to Mars, then we can't do it. Okay. If we know how to modify the atmosphere of Mars, but we can't get the equipment that we need to do it to Mars, then our knowledge is not really practical. All right. Additionally, we need the necessary funding, skilled labor, time, space, and other resources to develop the technology. Okay. So if converting the atmosphere of Mars into something that humans could live in was practical and we wanted to do this, we would need all these resources to begin that work. And then finally, the entrepreneurial initiative must be there. Okay, so entrepreneurial initiative is going to pull the necessary elements together for this technological development. Now, currently, we have some technological development in terms of traveling to Mars, in terms of exploring Mars, and so on and so forth. But there is not a great coordination in terms of actually colonizing the planet. And we would need that coordination driven by our entrepreneurial initiative if we were to successfully launch the technological development of colonizing Mars. Now, as we engage in technological development, our innovations are going to follow a pretty predictable pattern. Looks a lot like the S curve that you see on this screen here. Now, early on, the S curve is flat, so time is going on, but our performance is not improving a lot. And that's because we experience early problems. Okay, so what we see happen is we put out an idea, we try it, the prototype fails, the next idea doesn't work, and so on and so forth. All right, but then eventually, ideas start to work, and we start to build on one idea and do something better and do something better and do something better and so on. And that's where our product innovation is highest in this early stage here. And we start to see a dominant design emerge. Now, once a product has been around for a while, time continues to go on, but we start to see innovation wane a little bit. And that's because really, we've kind of come close to our optimal design. And it's become a lot more costly to innovate, and the market's a little bit saturated. So there's not really a whole lot of benefit to coming out with new products. All right. And if we were to take a look at, say, the microwave oven, we would see an innovation where we're kind of on this flat line up here. Okay. So as far as your microwave goes, we can add a few buttons here and there. We can maybe make some different size microwaves and so on. But we're very close to an optimal design in a microwave oven. There's not a whole lot more that we can do in terms of innovation there. So we really only see incremental innovations as we're up here at the top of the S curve. Now, as we think about technological developments and technology adoption, there are five different types of consumers that we're going to discuss in terms of technology adoption. The first one we call innovators. Okay, they're the first group to adopt a technology. And they'll pay a premium, meaning they pay more for the technology because it's new, and they also take a little bit of a risk. And what do we mean by risk? Well, over here on the right, we got a product called a mini disc player. This is a portable mini disc player produced by Sony in the 1990s. And I was kind of an innovator in adopting this technology. I was working in technology at the time, thought this product was really cool. Compact discs had just kind of taken over the music market about half a decade earlier. They provided better sound quality than audio cassettes had, but we couldn't record on compact discs. So Sony came up with this mini disc system, which allowed us to record at compact disc quality, but record as if we're using audio cassettes. It was really cool technology. I thought it was great. Okay. But the risk that I took was that in order for the mini disc to matter down the line and for my investment to be worthwhile, Sony had to continue to support the discs that this system used. Okay. Now, Sony didn't continue to support them. So I kind of lost on that risk. All right. Next, we have our early adopters. They're the next group to adopt. Okay. They often tend to be well respected opinion leaders. So if you think about celebrities or people in business who are maybe adopting new technologies and tweeting about them or talking about them in interviews, they would be examples of early adopters. Then, after our early adopters, we have the early majority who take a little bit longer to use something new, and they're often important community members, but not necessarily leaders. Then we have our late majority, who is very similar to the early majority, but they adopt a little bit later and they maybe are a little bit skeptical of technology change. Okay. It's not that they distrust the technology, but they're just not really sure that the technology is going to take off and they don't want to invest in it if it's not really a sure thing. And then finally, our last adopters are the laggards, and they're highly suspicious of innovation and change. They kind of expect everything to stay the way that it is and want things to be the way that they have been. And I've been a laggard before too. I was definitely a laggard when it came to smartphones. Okay. I was like the last person in the world, I think, to get a smartphone. But I knew that I really needed to see my email on my phone because that was kind of the pattern that we were following. So I actually went and figured out how to forward my email to my text messages by getting an att.txt.com address for my phone. And I was auto forwarding all my emails to my text message. So they were coming through on my regular flip phone. Okay, that's how much of a laggard I was in terms of adopting technology in that case. But eventually, our laggards do come around. I did get a smartphone as the market essentially forced me to. Now, as we look at the technology dissemination, the pattern for dissemination here is very similar to the pattern for innovation that we looked at before, as we've got ourselves a little bit of an S curve. Okay. And the innovators that we discussed before, they account for about 2.5% of our technology adopters. Our early adopters make up about 13.5%. Both the early majority and the late majority each account for about 34% of adopters. And the laggards actually account for about 16% of our technology adopters. Now, once we've put our technology out to the marketplace, technology diffusion is not as easy as it might sound, okay? Because getting people to change products is not always easy. All right. So there's two different positioning strategies that organizations can use to help with technology diffusion. The first is a low cost strategy. Okay, a low cost strategy basically means we're going to put our product out there at a price that's so low that people will have no choice but to give it a chance. Okay, if we're 20% below the marketplace, then people are going to try our product because, hey, if I could save 20%, why wouldn't I? All right. And then the other piece is differentiation. We're going to show people how our product is so different from what's out there that they're going to just have to try it. And if we go back to the early 2000s, Jam Huber used both positioning strategies to a degree when it introduced its Advantech product. All right. Advantech was an engineered subfloor that was designed to offer some benefits to home builders over the subfloors that they were currently using. Okay, and this is where Huber used its differentiation strategy. The big advantage to Advantech was that it could get wet without having any problems. If plywood got wet or OSB or other products that were used for subfloors, they often delaminated or fell apart, and you couldn't really put a good floor on top of them. Okay, so Huber came up with this product, Advantech, that was engineered in such a way that it could get wet and have no problems whatsoever. And they went around to trade shows with pieces of Advantech in jars that were full of water, and there were dates on the jars. All right. And these dates represented the date that the Advantech had gone into the water. And they showed people, hey, look, this is how our product performs compared to the other things that you're using. And that's how they played to a differentiation positioning strategy. Okay. They also offered a little bit of a low cost strategy. Okay. Because there were two dominant types of subfloor at the time. There was OSB and there was plywood. And plywood was considered the premier subfloor, particularly if it was a Douglas fir species or something of that nature. Okay. And what Huber did was they priced Advantech so that it was considerably less than plywood. All right. And in that sense, they were offering a low cost positioning strategy. Now, over time, as people recognized the value of Advantech, they focused on differentiation. They were actually able to raise the price of Advantech so that it was more expensive than plywood. All right. So they didn't stick with the differentiation strategy and a low cost strategy forever because that would have been really tough to do. All right. But in the beginning, when they were trying to get their technology to be adopted, they did use both positioning strategies. Now, sometimes the technologies that we're going to introduce to the marketplace are going to be disruptive in nature. And this occurs when a technology changes the way that we consume a product or service. All right. So, some great examples of disruptive technologies are the technologies behind Uber, Netflix, and the MP3 player. All right. So, if you think about Uber, we used to have to go out to the street and hail a taxi cab in the city. Now we can simply just pull up an app on our phone, order a car, and track it on our phone. If you think about Netflix, we used to have to get up and go to a video store to rent a physical copy of a movie. Now we can sit back in the luxury of our own home, the convenience of our own home, and just choose a movie on our TV through an app. All right. And if you think about the MP3 player, we used to have to purchase physical copies of music and we used to have to purchase full albums. Now we can download albums if we want to, but we can also download single songs. We never have to leave our house to get music because of the MP3 player. Now, as disruptive innovations occur, managers often face something called the innovator's dilemma. And what the innovator's dilemma refers to is having to balance the need for short term success against capitalizing on a disruptive technology. In an earlier unit, we talked about Kodak and the digital camera. We talked about how Kodak actually invented the digital camera, but didn't really move forward with it aggressively because they were very focused on their film business. Film was kind of the bread and butter of Kodak at the time. That was their short term success, so to speak. And they really didn't want to give up on that. So they didn't capitalize on the innovation of the digital camera. Instead, other competitors capitalized on it. Now, when you decide to introduce a technology into the marketplace, you have to decide whether or not you want to be a first mover. And being a first mover has several advantages. All right. For one, you can charge higher prices for your product if your product is unique and offers an advantage to consumers that they can only obtain through you. Okay. That is related to there being little or no competition in the marketplace. And having little or no competition also puts you in a position where you can capture a greater portion of market share. All right. As you develop the market, you're going to have some efficiencies there because you're going to be able to develop the market in such a way that works for your organization. And you can also create switching costs. And what we mean by switching costs is that if people adopt your technology, it's going to be difficult for them to transition to someone else's technology in the future. So if I adopt a computer software that I'm using for data analysis, and then a computer software comes out that I'd like to switch to, I have to convert all of my data sets so they're going to work with that new software. So I may not want to do that because I may not want to invest the time and the energy into switching softwares. All right. Being a first mover also has some disadvantages, though. There's greater risk. All right. So, as a first mover, you haven't actually seen how your technology is going to play out in the marketplace. You don't know for sure how consumers are going to respond to it. So, you're taking a risk because the market is undeveloped. All right. There's obviously the cost of the technology development. And then there's also the cost of the market development and the customer education. So when we talked about JM Huber going out to trade shows and having little pieces of Advantech in jars of water with dates on it and educating people on what this product was, that was a cost to them. When other people came later and imitated Huber's product, when they imitated the Advantech, they didn't have to go through and do that same type of market development and customer education. Now, as we discuss some of the disadvantages associated with being a first mover, we're going to recognize that sometimes following is actually the best option. People often think of Microsoft as inventing the spreadsheet, but that's not actually accurate. Apple introduced VisiCalc in 1979, and Lotus introduced Lotus 123 in 1983. Microsoft didn't come through with Excel until 1987, but they took over the marketplace in terms of spreadsheets by the 1990s, and they haven't looked back because they were able to learn from what Apple and Lotus had done. All right, Facebook had a very similar situation. MySpace owned the social media marketplace, but MySpace made a lot of mistakes and they had some cash flow issues. Facebook was able to capitalize on both of these things and took over the social media marketplace. All right, both Microsoft and Facebook are great examples of how sometimes following is a better option than being a first mover. Now, as we develop technologies, it's important to have a good understanding of what our technology portfolio looks like. And we can gain this understanding through something called a technology audit, which is the process of clarifying key technologies on which our organization depends. All right. Now, there are four different categories that we're going to classify technologies in as we conduct our technology audit. The first is an emerging technology. And this is a technology that's under development, but definitely has a potential to change the rules of future competition. All right, then we have pacing technologies, and these exist and they also have the potential to change the rules of competition. Then we have our key technologies, which are effective technologies and they're important to us and they provide us with a little bit of an advantage because not everybody knows how to effectively use them. And then finally, we have our base technologies, which are fairly commonplace in the industry. Now, often what happens is emerging technologies, if they do succeed, will progress through this until they become base technologies. A great example of this would be to think about the spreadsheets that we just talked about on the previous slide. How in 1979, the early 1980s, these spreadsheets were emerging technologies, but today they're simply nothing more than a base technology. Now, as we consider developing and exploiting technological innovations, there are three relevant criteria that we have to keep our eyes on as we move forward here. And we're going to talk about these criteria through the lens of a flying automobile. All right, the first criteria is the anticipated market receptiveness. So essentially, do people want our product? Is there going to be market potential both in the short term and in the long term? So, with the flying automobile, do people want to drive flying cars? That's one of the questions that we would be looking at. Then we have technological feasibility. So, are the innovations feasible? All right, do we have the technology available to build the product that we want to build? So, is there reason to believe that we actually can build a flying car? Do we have the supporting technology to make this happen? And then finally, we have economic viability. Is there a good financial incentive to do this project? So, if the market wants flying cars and we know we can build flying cars, are we going to be able to make money off flying cars? Well, there's a lot of things that you're going to have to consider as you walk through economic viability. Are the flying cars going to be able to drive on our existing roads, or are they going to need a separate infrastructure? And if they need a separate infrastructure, who's going to pay for that infrastructure? Are we going to have to contribute to it? Is it going to be covered by the government? How is that going to work? All right, will insurance companies insure our flying automobiles? And if they won't, is that going to stop them from ever actually being successful in the marketplace? These are the types of questions that we're going to ask as we look at economic viability. We also have to think about how well innovation fits within the culture of our organization. Okay, some organizations are what we call prospector firms, right? And they tend to be proactive innovators. Other organizations are defender firms, and they tend to just use technology to support their capabilities, not to replace them. They're not trying to do anything new with technology. They're just trying to continue doing what they do and do it better. All right, and then we also have analyzer firms, and they're firms that are not against innovation, but they tend to like to sit back, watch what others do, and then be the early followers. We also need to recognize that different organizations are going to have different capabilities when it comes to dealing with new technologies. And a lot of times, this difference in capabilities is going to be based on the knowledge, skills, and abilities of our employees. So, because of this, managers need to consider the impact that implementing new technologies is going to have on their people. I came from an industry where people didn't have extensive computer training. So, when we implemented a new business system that changed the way our people needed to interact with our computers, it created a lot of challenges for our employees. In an industry or even a company where people had more computer training, the challenges created by implementing a new business system might not have been so great. Now, once we've decided that we need to implement a new technology, we need to decide where this technology is going to come from and how we're going to acquire it. And this is often referred to as a make or buy decision. Now, I don't really love the term make or buy because it makes it sound like acquiring a technology is a binary decision. Like we have two options, but there's actually a lot of different options that we have here. One is internal development, which is what we would typically think of as make. Okay, so internal development can be helpful if we don't want other people to be able to use the technology. We don't want others to have knowledge about the technology and so on. Okay, then we could purchase, which is what we would think of as buy. Okay, and this is basically the technology that we need is out there somewhere, and we just need to find it and we need to buy it and use it. Okay, and then we have contracted development. Okay, and this basically is if we wanted to make the technology, but we don't have the abilities to make the technology, then we're going to hire somebody to make the technology for us. Okay, then there's another option called licensing. And this is where we basically purchase the right to use a technology for a specific time period. All right, there's also technology trading, where firms can offer to share technologies with each other based upon their different capabilities. All right, we can also engage in research partnerships and joint ventures when two or more firms share the cost of developing a technology. And then finally, we could simply acquire a technology owner. So if there's a company out there that has the technology that we need, we could look to purchase that organization. So, how do we decide how to acquire the technology? We're going to start with three basic questions. First question is it important and possible in terms of competitive advantage that the technology remain proprietary? And if it is, we're going to move on to question number two. Question number two asks, are the time, skills, and resources for internal development available? And if they are, then we're going to try to go with internal development. But if they're not, then we're going to look into acquiring the owner of the technology or an exclusive research contract. All right. If it's not important that the technology remain proprietary, then we're going to look at question number three. Is the technology readily available outside of the company? And if it is, then we're going to look at the options of purchasing, licensing, or trading. And if it's not, we're going to look into a joint venture or a research partnership. So, what types of organizations are successful at innovation? Well, learning organizations tend to be well positioned to innovate. And this is because learning organizations create, acquire, and transfer knowledge. Okay, they then modify their behavior in response to this knowledge. An organization that's positioned well to innovate is also going to have a focus on ambidexterity, or the ability to exploit existing capabilities and explore new knowledge. In other words, ambidextrous organizations can improve their performance and develop new capabilities at the same time. The greater your organization can be in terms of ambidexterity, the less you're going to be plagued by the innovator's dilemma. As we position our organizations for innovation, it's important to think about having the right people in the right roles. And we're going to walk through a few roles that we have on the screen here, and they're color coded for a reason. I'm going to take you through that color coding. First, in black, we have the Chief Information Officer or the Chief Technology Officer. Now, these positions are color coded together because they are the only formal positions that we have listed here on this slide. Okay, and having a chief information officer or chief technology officer is very important because these are executive management level positions. And by having somebody in executive management who has a focus on technology, they're going to be able to advocate for you. They're going to be able to help position you so that you have the resources that you need to innovate. Then we have the entrepreneur or the technical innovator. And these are both positions that are focused on different aspects of the innovation process itself. These are informal positions. The entrepreneur invents new products or finds ways to produce old products. The technical innovator develops or installs and operates the new technology. Then finally, we have the product champion and the executive champion. And these are color coded together in red because these are also informal positions, but these positions here are focused on promoting innovation. Okay, and it's critical that you have people within the organization promoting innovation because you can have the best technologies and the best innovations out there, but if your people don't buy into them, you're not going to be able to be effective in the realm of innovation. Positioning our organizations for innovation also requires that we celebrate failures. And this doesn't necessarily mean celebrating the failed product or the failed service, but celebrating the process that got us to this failure. Okay, now why would we want to celebrate failure? Well, let's look at Harley Davidson as an example. Now, if you think about Harley Davidson, you might think of Harley Davidson as a motorcycle company, but Harley Davidson's much more than a motorcycle company. Okay, they sell dishware, they sell clothing, they sell jewelry. Harley Davidson has a whole line of other products that are not related to motorcycles. Okay. Now, on the screen here, you see a picture of a failed Harley Davidson product. This is the Harley Davidson perfume. Now, I have no idea what this perfume smells like. It might smell like motor oil. It might smell like gasoline. It might smell like exhaust fumes. I have no idea what a Harley Davidson perfume is going to smell like. But I can tell you that this product was not a success on the market. Okay. It was an utter failure. Now, within Harley Davidson, though, you need to be able to celebrate the process of getting this product to the market. Why? Because if we don't celebrate the process of getting this product to the market, then someone else might be afraid to bring something else to market. Okay. We can't have punishment for failed products. If we have punishment for failed products, then people aren't going to bring the next great idea out to the marketplace. So Harley Davidson has Legos, they have toys, they have a whole bunch of other things that you wouldn't necessarily think about when you think about motorcycles. But if we punish the people who brought the Harley Davidson perfume to the marketplace, then the person who brought the next great idea to the marketplace may have never come forward with that idea. Positioning your organization for innovation requires having the right structure. In one of my favorite books about innovation, Radical Innovation, they talk a lot about how new technologies and new ideas emerging within organizations often get slowed down by the bureaucracy and structures of the organizations because large established companies are not necessarily designed to support innovation. Okay, they often advocate for having structures that are specifically designed to support innovation. All right. Bureaucracy has a place within our organizations. It helps us maintain efficiency in our day to day operations, but it doesn't necessarily help us innovate. And we need to think about how are we going to structure our organizations in such a way that we can maintain our order, we can maintain our efficiency, but we can also support innovation. We can also drive innovation in our organizations through development projects. And a development project is a focused organizational effort to create a new product or process using technological advances. Okay, these are often of strategic importance to our organizations, so they'll be under intense budget and time pressures. All right. One of the ways that we help move development projects along fast and inexpensively is through agile design. And in agile design, we go through a process where we discover, design, develop, and test. Then, once we test and find new opportunities, we restart the process by again discovering, redesigning, redeveloping, retesting. And this process continues over and over and over again. We can also support innovation in our organizations by ensuring that we have the technologies in place that are going to support our people. Earlier in this course, we talked about socio-technical systems and the idea that people need to have the right tools in place to do their job. Our technology should empower our employees to innovate. The technology should work for the people, not the other way around. For example, as an educator, I often try to innovate in what I do in my classroom, and I try to innovate in terms of how I assign work to students, and I may come up with ideas for new ways that I want to do extra credit or new ways that I want to offer students choices in the types of assignments that they do. And often I'm limited by what my learning management system is capable of doing. So I'll come up with an idea that I could implement, but I don't have the technology in place that actually will allow me to implement it. So I need to adapt my idea to fit the technology. If we want to support innovation, we need to have technology in place that's not going to force our people to adapt, but rather the technology is going to support them in innovating. Through innovation, organizations often strive to become what we call world class. And this means applying the best and latest knowledge and ideas within your organization, operating at high standards, and being one of the best at what you do. Researchers have studied world class organizations and tried to figure out what makes them so successful. And below, you see some examples of the types of companies that have been studied. And some of the commonalities amongst these organizations are that they have strong and consistent core values. They're driven by goals, including stretch goals. They embrace continuous change, and they consistently focus on beating themselves. And when they focus on beating themselves, they're not just focused on improving their numbers year over year, but they also look to identify missed opportunities and come up with ways to avoid missing such opportunities in the future. One of the challenges faced by managers is that we often think of our choices and decisions in a binary format. In other words, we think either I choose point A or I choose point B. But in world class organizations, we often manage to transition from this or mentality to an and mentality. And I'm going to give you an example of this. So, managers may think of innovation and cost control as being incompatible. Okay, so either I can control costs and be fiscally responsible, or I can engage in innovation. Okay, but if we transition to an and mentality, then we'll start to think of things like I can control costs and be fiscally responsible by engaging in innovation and supporting process innovations that are going to result in reduced costs. We can also work towards becoming a world class organization and embracing innovation through organizational development. And this is a system wide application of behavioral science knowledge to develop, improve, and reinforce the strategies, structures, and processes that are going to lead to organizational effectiveness. And the two principles behind organizational development are that it aims to improve organizational effectiveness and it supports human potential, development, and participation. A 10-year study that included 160 organizations also found four major themes across successful organizations. First, they had a strategy that was focused on customers, continually fine tuned based upon market changes, and clearly communicated to employees. Second, in terms of execution, they had good people with decision making authority on the front lines, doing quality work and cutting costs. Third, organizational cultures were motivating. They empowered people to innovate. They rewarded people. They had strong values. They challenged people. And they provided a satisfying work environment. And then finally, in terms of structure, their structure made the organizations easy to work in and easy to work with. There was a lot of cooperation, exchange of information, and exchange of knowledge throughout the organizations. For all that we've talked about the importance of change and innovation within our organizations, it's important to recognize that leading change is not always easy. And this is in part because change is happening constantly and it's often unpredictable. In my lifetime, we've seen organizations have to respond to things like the COVID-19 pandemic and the housing bubble bursting. And in both of these cases, organizations had to respond rapidly and they weren't always fully prepared for these changes. Okay, the challenge that we deal with as leaders in terms of change and innovation is that we're trying to balance cultures that are innovative, but also contribute to a sustainable business model. And as we do this, we need to remember that leading change and innovation requires shared leadership. Our people can't just be supporters of change, but they also have to be involved in developing change and implementing the results. But getting our employees to implement change is not always easy either. Okay. And there's a lot of reasons for this. One of them being inertia. Sometimes people are just happy with the status quo and they don't necessarily see a need to change. Okay. Additionally, we can have timing issues. So, for example, I came from a very seasonal industry, and there were some times, for example, early spring, where we were super busy. And if we tried to put a change in policy or a change in procedure on our employees' shoulders at that point in time, they would look at us like we were crazy. They'd say, "Hey, we have so much on our shoulders right now. How can you possibly put one more thing on us?" So we had to try to time change so that it took place in our slower seasons. Okay, there's also a little bit of an element of surprise with some changes. While managers may be focused on the environmental factors that are driving change, if we don't communicate with our employees, they don't necessarily recognize the need for change and may be caught off guard when we try to implement it. Additionally, there can be issues with peer pressure. Okay, so if we have a large group of employees that are not embracing change, they may put some pressure on other employees not to embrace change either. All right, there can also be employee specific reasons for not embracing change. So people may consider their self interest, a new policy that is beneficial for the company on the whole and most of our employees may not necessarily benefit all of our employees. And those who don't benefit may put up some resistance. There can be a misunderstanding between employees and management about why change is taking place or what it entails. Sometimes we have different assessments where management believe that change is necessary, but employees don't believe that it's necessary. And finally, management tactics can play an important role in whether or not our employees buy into the need for change. Now, if our employees are resistant to change, we're going to use a three-stage model to try to overcome that resistance. And in this model, we go through the processes of unfreezing, moving, and refreezing. And I'm going to walk you through each one of these steps through the help of an example. Years ago, I had an employee who was on a set schedule. They worked from 5 a.m. to 2 p.m. Monday through Friday. Okay. And this was a little bit problematic because it didn't really meet our business needs. And I had other employees who were upset about this set schedule because the fact that one person always got the opening shifts meant that other people got stuck with closing shifts that they didn't want, and so on. So I started with the unfreezing process by talking to the employee about the business needs and how them being there at 5 a.m. didn't really meet the business needs, and how them having a set schedule was impacting their coworkers and impacting people's job satisfaction and so on. And the employee understood this. So unfreezing was fairly successful. But even though the employee understood the need for them to move their schedule, they didn't agree to it because they had other needs of their own that prevented them from moving. And this is where I went through the moving phase. And I had to figure out what those needs were. And I found out there were financial issues. The employee was working two jobs. They had to rely on both of these incomes. And if they lost their 5 to 2 schedule, it was going to impact their ability to work their second job. So I worked with the employee and helped them find an internal grant through our company, and that internal grant actually changed their needs. So they didn't need to work both jobs anymore. And once they got that grant and things kind of changed here, they were willing to move their schedule. Okay. And then finally, we went through the refreezing stage where basically what we had to do is we don't want to create rigid behavior, but we do kind of want to set it in stone that things have changed. So I had to work with my scheduler to make sure that we didn't give the employee too consistent of a schedule. Make sure we don't give this person opening shifts every day of a week because then they're going to fall right back into the routine of expecting opening shifts. So we've got to make sure that they've got, at least two or three opening shifts, but they also have to have some closing shifts and maybe a midday shift and so on. And what that did is that basically set the standard that they were going to have a rotating schedule. And that was the third and final stage, refreezing. Now, if we want our change to be successful in the long term, we should use multiple approaches for gaining cooperation. Or in the first four that we're going to go over here are examples of developing true support. All right, the first one is to educate our employees and communicate with them. Then we also want to make sure that we involve key stakeholders in the change development and change management processes. And by key stakeholders, we're talking about people who are really going to be impacted by the change here. All right, then we also want to make sure that we're providing support and resources that are necessary for our employees. We shouldn't impose a change upon them and then not provide them with the tools that they need to be successful. And then finally, we want to offer incentives to encourage the change. All right, there are also some steps that we could take that kind of help to drive the change forward if we're having trouble gaining cooperation. One is that we could use covert tactics as necessary. All right, so maybe we do things where we implement small, tiny changes or get small agreements without showing the employees the big picture of the overall change. That would be an example of a covert tactic. We can also force the change. Okay. We could basically say, here's the change. It's coming down the pike. Either you work here and you deal with it, or you don't work here anymore. All right. But we want to remember that developing true support is always going to be better than driving a program forward. And it's important to build stability throughout the change process. So, as much as we're going to talk to people about what the change is going to look like, we also need to make sure that we announce and talk about important things that will not change so our employees can see what is going to be consistent throughout their experience within the organization as this change occurs. As we implement change within our organizations, it's important to remember that it's very rare that one single change is going to yield all the results that we desire. All right, so often we'll have multiple changes occurring within our organization, and we may embrace something called total organizational change. And this involves introducing and sustaining multiple policies, practices, and procedures across different units and levels of the organization. Now, one of the challenges with total organizational change is that when we have too much change occurring within the organization, our employees sometimes don't buy in fully. They see change as kind of a flavor of the month. Oh, this is what we're doing now. We just need to get through this until the next change comes through, and so on. So, one of the things that we could do here is we could try to reduce the number of unnecessary changes that occur by asking questions such as: what is the evidence that the approach can really produce positive results? Is the approach relevant to our company's strategies and priorities? What are the costs and potential benefits of the changes? Does the change really help people add value through their work? And does the change help the company better focus on customers and the things they value? Okay, now if the answers to these questions don't indicate that the change is going to be truly beneficial, it's probably a good idea to pass on that change. Once we've decided what changes to enact, we have to make sure that we take an active role in leading change. All right. So the first thing that managers can do is establish a sense of urgency. People need to understand that change is imminent and that change is important right away. Okay. We also need to create a guiding coalition or a group of people who are going to help to implement the change. We need to develop a vision and strategy. Just as we've talked about earlier in this course, having a vision so that people understand what your end goals are and what you're working towards is very important. We then need to communicate the vision to ensure that people do understand it. We want to empower broad based action by removing obstacles from people's way. All right, we also need to generate short term wins. We may be implementing a change that is going to take 2 to 3 years to realize the full benefits of. But what are the benefits of what happened this week? What wins did we achieve recently? We need to make sure that we communicate these so that people don't lose hope. All right, we also want to consolidate gains and produce more change. Essentially, what we're doing here is simply building off the momentum. As people see our success, we're going to keep moving forward. All right, and then finally, we want to anchor the new approaches in the culture. By celebrating our change, by celebrating our efforts, we're going to make them an important part of what our organization does. Often, the changes that managers implement are reactive in nature, meaning that we're responding to a problem. But really, a better approach is to be proactive. All right, and when we're proactive, we anticipate and recognize that the future is going to be uncertain. And we implement changes that are designed to prepare us for that future, but also help shape that future to be something that we believe we can succeed in. In preparing for an uncertain future, managers can take two different approaches. The first approach is to be an adapter. And adapters essentially believe that they're not going to be able to shape their industry, but they can respond to what comes. And they focus on meeting customers' articulated needs. Okay, shapers, on the other hand, believe that they can actually influence their industry, and they focus on meeting customers' unarticulated needs as well. And by unarticulated needs, we mean the things that customers desire but don't necessarily recognize. Okay. And by recognizing what these unarticulated needs are and preparing to respond to them, shapers are able to help influence their industries. You can apply this concept of shaping to your own future. And to do so, you want to think about how can you exceed expectations, break free of constraints, and seize opportunities. And to meet these objectives, you can do things like develop your skills, find ways to become indispensable to your organization, and always work to keep your options open. And as you prepare for your future, be sure to play the long game, find ways to collaborate with others, and always commit to lifelong learning. That's it for this lesson. Thanks so much for joining me here. This is Billy Obenauer saying, hope you enjoyed it, hope you learned something, and we'll talk to you soon.